What's going on, growers? It's James Prigioni coming to you live from Jersey. Today, me and Tucker are going to show you how to prep your garden for spring and share 3 important tips everyone needs to know. Let's go! For the first tip, let's get into starting seeds. Advice I wish I could have told myself years ago was do not panic start seeds on the first nice day. In my opinion, it's always better to start your seeds at least a week or 2 late rather than too early. Plants that are started a bit late will catch up when the ground and the weather heats up, but plants that are root bound are much tougher to get back into that vigorous growth stage. If you get too excited and want to start early, just make sure you plant another round of that same plant 2 weeks after the one you started early. I am confident that the round of plants that you start 2 weeks later will not only catch up to the ones you started earlier, but will actually grow better and produce earlier after you transplant them out. And this should prove to you that starting earlier doesn't always lead to earlier harvests, and that bigger transplants don't always lead to bigger and earlier harvests. Plants grow best when they can sprout and grow continuously without any hiccups. So what I like to do is I'll start my seeds in my trays like this and then transplant to a larger pot. But if you start really early, then you're gonna have to transplant into a larger pot after that. If you don't transplant into a larger pot, then what's gonna happen is your plants are gonna be root bound by the time you wanna transplant them out if it isn't nice enough out. If that happens, when you do actually transplant out root bound plants, they're gonna take a considerable amount of time to adjust back into the growth stage. This year, make sure when you transplant out, you put in your journal the most ideal time to transplant out into the garden. Then in the future, what you can do is count back when to plant your seeds from that transplant date instead of what it says on somewhere like a website. For example, in the past, I would use the Old Farmer's Almanac website as guidance when to start my seeds. So when it came to something like peppers, the website would tell me for my specific location to start planting my peppers between February 18th and March 4th. But after growing peppers for years, I now reference my own garden journal, and it tells me not to start planting my peppers till about March 14th. When it comes to starting tomatoes, the website tells me to start the tomatoes between March 4th and March 19th. But when I look at my own garden journal, it tells me not to start planting my tomatoes until mid-April, because the best time for me to transplant out my tomatoes is around May 20th. My garden journal also tells me to start a second round of peppers to plant into the ground after I harvest my cabbages at the end of June, around June 24th. So what I'll do this year is plant a second round of peppers in early May. A very important thing we need to do to prepare our spring seedlings is to build some kind of hoop house or some kind of cover for your plants. So a simple cover like this will protect your plants from early frost. It'll protect them from any kind of insects, and it will also protect them from any kind of rabbits or groundhogs. There's nothing worse than taking all the time to start some beautiful seedlings, having them grow, transplant them out, only to wake up in the morning and a rabbit or groundhog has basically wiped you completely out. It's always better to be safe rather than sorry. The little boss is still digging up carrots from last year, snacking on them. He's got the nose to be able to just go out there, sniff out the carrots, and pick the exact ones that he wants. He knows what he's doing out here. That's why he's the boss. That's why he's the leader. Right, boy? Yeah, you know, just an afternoon snack with some fresh carrots. Can't beat that. Me and Tuck, the little boss back there, he's still snacking on the carrot. We want to mention to grab some of the merch down at jamesprigioni.com. Grab one of the Tuck shirts, grab a Team Grow shirt, grab a Food Forest shirt, and just be part of the team. For the second tip, let's get into raised beds. Building, filling, and prepping. If you want to build a raised bed for cheap, you can build one out of a softwood, something like pine if you want to. Just know that it will only last about 4 or 5 growing seasons. This bed I built in 2019, and it's heading into its 4th growing season, and it's still holding up pretty good. Something as simple as making sure you don't bury the bed will help it last longer. This year, on some new raised beds I built, I coated them with raw linseed oil. I read online that it doesn't prevent some of the fungi from getting into the wood, but I still want to try it out, and I love the patina look it gives on the wood also. If you want something that will last a long time, then you can go with a Birdie's raised bed. Just make sure when you put it together that you have some soil ready to actually fill it up. Also, don't forget to use discount code TUCK at checkout for a nice little discount. Next, when filling your beds, if they're deep raised beds, fill the bottom with logs, sticks, and dried organic matter. This will help you save money on soil, because when it comes down to it, for most veggies, you only need about 18 inches of good soil. To fill your beds, you can either purchase bag soil or you can make your own soil. That's what I suggest you do if you can get some good quality compost. So my mixture that I use, a very basic mixture, is 1/3 compost, 1/3 either cocoa coir or peat moss. I prefer coco coir. And then almost 1/3 of either vermiculite or perlite. So vermiculite is going to help with water retention. Perlite is going to help to lighten your soil and actually help with drainage. I usually mix a little bit of both together. If your raised bed is already filled with soil from last year and you didn't cover it with a layer of compost in the fall, now's a good time to do that. I suggest adding about 3 inches of compost to the top of your bed, and you can also add some all-purpose organic fertilizer. What I like to do is take those two and mix them into about the top 3 inches of the soil. After that, you could start running your strings for your square foot garden and start to decide what to plant where. And that can be tricky at times. That's why I think square foot gardening is such a great method, because especially for new gardeners, it could feel overwhelming to decide what to plant in a 40 square foot bed. But it's much easier to decide what to plant 1 square foot at a time. Just make sure when you're planting out your bed that you have the tallest plants and the climbers on the north side of your bed, and then the shortest plants, like your lettuces, on the south side of the bed. This way, when the sun hits your bed, you won't have the tall plants shading out the shorter plants. For the third tip, let's talk about fruit trees and other perennials. One of the greatest things you can do to improve the quality of the fruit you're getting on your trees, and also to get fruit more consistently, is to prune your trees properly. When it comes to pruning, I know it's tough to cut away a lot of the growth, especially if you're new to growing fruit trees, but when it comes down to it, we grow the fruit trees to get the fruit from them. So if taking away some of the growth and taking away some of the branches leads to getting more fruit consistently, then it might be hard, but it's the right thing to do. At this time of year, also, we want to go out and remove any of the fruit on the fruit trees that's still up there. These are often called mummies, and these old pieces of fruit will harbor a lot of fungal spores that can spread throughout the rest of the tree if we don't remove them. So we want to make sure we take all those out. Also, we want to look at the ground and make sure that we pick up and remove from the property any fruit that has fallen to the ground, or any of the seeds or anything, like a big peach pit or something, because these might be harboring pests. Also, it's a good idea if your fruit trees produced heavy last year, or they put out a lot of growth, to pull back the wood chips, put a nice layer of compost down. You can even mix in some organic fertilizer, then cover the compost back up with wood chips. The wood chips are really important because they're going to help retain moisture, and it's going to make it so you don't have to water your trees as much. If you haven't pruned your brambles yet, like your raspberries and your blackberries, now is the time to do that. When it comes to fall bearing raspberries, they produce fruit on 1-year-old canes. So what you could do is you could either cut those canes all the way down to the ground, then in the spring they'll shoot up new canes, and these canes will have fruit on the top of them in the fall. Just make sure if you do this that you cut the canes all the way down to the ground. If you leave a stub, then what will happen is it'll shoot up weak, unproductive canes from that stub, and they just won't fruit very well. Or for your fall bearing raspberries, what you could do is you could leave the canes growing, and they will produce fruit on the side shoots in the spring. The fruit crop will be smaller though than if you cut them all the way to the ground. Just make sure after they fruit in the spring that you cut the canes out, because they're going to basically just die back. What I decided to do this year was keep my bed half and half. So one side of the bed, I cut those raspberries all the way to the ground so that they will produce good, high quality fruit in the fall, because that tends to be the best quality fruit. But I also left half of my bed and didn't cut those canes. This way I'll get a nice production of raspberries in the spring. If you have the issue of fruit flies where you live and they come later in the summer, which happens to me sometimes, it might be a good idea to leave some of your canes uncut. This way you get the spring crop and you kind of avoid some of those fruit fly issues. In my opinion, the best raspberries tend to be the yellow ones when it comes to fall bearing raspberries. They're so incredibly sweet and so good, like the fall gold and the yellow ant. For summer bearing raspberries and erect blackberries, they produce fruit on 2-year-old canes. So what you want to do now is go out there, make sure that there's no diseased or dead canes, and you want to reduce the number of canes per plant to about 2 or 3 strong canes. Then you want to check how long those side branches are. That's where your fruit is going to be. If they're really long, you want to reduce the length of those, because we don't want those getting heavy with fruit and then touching the ground. Then when new canes come out of the ground in the spring and summer, what you want to do is you want to cut back those canes at about 3 or 4 feet height. This way they focus more on lateral branches, because that's where all the fruit will be. When it comes to growing blueberries, when they reach the age of production, it's a good idea to go out there during the dormant season, like now, and prune out some of that old brown wood. This way, new fruiting canes will come up. These new fruiting canes will be much more productive than that old wood. Like I mentioned earlier, these are fruiting bushes, just like we had fruit trees. We want to focus all the attention on getting fruit, not just growing leaves. Me and Tuck want to leave you with a bonus tip before we let you go, and this one has to do with weeds. If you allow weeds to get out of control in your garden, it could really become a nightmare. That's one reason growing in raised beds is so nice, because you only have to weed that one section that you're planting in. But if you have a food forest like me, you really want to stay on top of the weeds. The best way to do this, in my opinion, is you want to lay down a layer of cardboard or contractor's paper, which is essentially just thin cardboard, then cover that with a thick layer of wood chips. Not only will this prevent the weeds from coming up, this will also slowly build your soil fertility and build better soil structure. So all these worms and the fungus and everything will be working on improving your garden while you're actually preventing the weeds at the same time. That's today's video, growers. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. I hope these 3 tips bring you some value. Even something as simple as just starting your seeds a couple weeks later, I think it's going to save you so much time, so much frustration, and so much just running around and extra work. I've been guilty of starting my seeds way too early, and then you try to find where to put all these large plants. The plants look large, you think you're going to get earlier harvest, but then something like a volunteer pops up and catches up with your plant. So it's just a lot of extra work for little payout, in my opinion. When it comes down to it, we had a lot of fun out here. We hope you did too. Tuck has been chilling with us, the leader, the boss, always staying strong, always hanging out here, always keeping watch of the whole garden. That's why he's the guardian of the garden. If you guys want to grab some merch, check it out at jamesprigioni.com. We also wanted to thank one of our new channel members, Alicia Morris. Thanks for being a part of Team Grow. Thanks for having your hand in everything we're doing back here. We really appreciate you. Tuck and James, we'll be back at you again real soon. We